Hey guys, this is your local friendly eating disorder therapist, and I just wanted to talk a little bit today about how we may not actually inherit all of our emotions we may actually inherit some of our emotions and trauma, and how people don't often connect those dots. So, before I started my grad school training, I was under the impression, and a lot of people are, that when we have emotions and we are struggling with anxiety or other feelings inside of us, especially the ones that we're kind of like, well, why am I having this emotion? And, the typical emotions in that category would be things like depression, anxiety, feelings of shame, feelings of stress and overwhelm, and especially if they feel like they come out of the blue, there might actually be an intergenerational link to it. And what I mean by that is we are finding more and more, even just from the science, but also just systemically from the experience that family therapists have in therapy, that some people almost inherit feelings and experiences that people in their family haven't resolved. So for instance, if your family had a tragic death occur and then nobody processed it or talked about it, there might actually be some emotionality and experiences of anxiety that can come in the offspring or the children of these family members, because that will kind of, it's hard to explain, but there have been instances where people will feel some of the anxiety and some of the emotionality of even the person that passed away, if it's never talked about or resolved. Another way of thinking about this is, we know that for mothers, when they have babies that, well, not just mothers, but parents in general, their emotional state is picked up by their children, even when they're really, really, really little. So I think a lot of people think, well, when they're babies, they never saw us fight. We never said anything bad. Well, children really pick up on the emotional experiences as well, even if they don't have words to verbalize it. And so that's another way that we can kind of inherit family emotions and trauma. Another way they're finding too in the research is if you had family that went through some traumatic experiences. And when I say traumatic, I'm going to use the general term that like they went through experiences that just really profoundly impacted them, or maybe really stressed them out or changed their worldview, because it doesn't always have to be a car accident or hurricane or a traumatic divorce necessarily. It could be more subtle things like moving across the country. And when family members before us have had these experiences, sometimes genetically they can alter kind of their genetic offspring generation to generation. So things that even happen to your grandparents, you may actually have some of the epigenetic alterations from that emotional experience, especially if they never change that gene, if that makes sense. So like if they didn't process it, if they didn't work through it, they could have turned on a gene that then gets inherited into the next generation. One of the things that they did find, and I can't remember the researcher's name because I'm not very good at like those details, which I really wish I was, but there's a researcher that worked in PTSD that found that people with PTSD actually had lower levels of cortisol, which is really different from what we used to think. And I'm not even going to go into that rabbit trail, but basically they found that the offspring of these people also would inherently have low levels of cortisol. And so it was just a really interesting study, because they found that genetically things were altered in these people that they had no control over. So all of this is to say, I know that there's a lot of shame in the mental health industry around seeking help. And I even talked to a client the other day, and her story kind of broke my heart, because for several years, almost even a decade, she had all these emotions and had been struggling with things, but just felt like it was her being crazy. And so with that shame and stigma, had never sought treatment until it came out in a different way, where she was finally kind of willing to go and work on things. But I just want to spread that message that if you're struggling with things, if you're having a lot of emotionality, whether that's anxiety or depression, and especially if it's not making sense to you, don't suffer alone. It could be a matter of all sorts of things, including your family history and things you have no control over. So I really encourage you to get that help I think that it's nobody's fault when they're struggling with mental health issues, but it is our responsibility to go and do what we can to break that cycle and to try to process those emotions, even if they had to do with stuff that happened in our family way, way long ago or in our genetics. And so seek a counselor or a therapist that works with that stuff and understands intergenerational trauma, such as MFTs. And I know a lot of other fields do too, but I know for sure MFTs do. And yeah, I just encourage you to reach out and to not suffer in silence. All right, that's it for today, and I hope you guys have an awesome week.